The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair. But James felt alive for the first time in months. His heart, once a traitor that stuttered and stalled, now beat steadily, thanks to the man who'd pulled him back from the edge. He'd never forget those piercing blue eyes or the calm voice that promised he'd survive. 3 years ago, James Carter was 25, drowning in a haze of cheap whiskey and heartbreak. His life unraveling in a small Ohio town. Diagnosed with a rare heart condition. He'd been told he had months, maybe weeks, left. The local hospital couldn't handle his case, so he was transferred to a prestigious medical center in Chicago. There, Dr. Ethan Caldwell, a renowned cardiologist, performed the surgery that saved him. James remembered every detail: Ethan's steady hands, his quiet confidence, and the fleeting moment when their eyes locked in the recovery room. "You're going to be okay," Ethan had said, his voice soft but certain. James clung to those words like a lifeline. But life after survival wasn't easy. James returned to Ohio, piecing himself back together. He trained as a nurse, determined to give back what Ethan had given him hope. Now, at 28, he'd landed a job at St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago, a dream opportunity to work at one of the best hospitals in the country. On his first day, his heart raced not from his old condition, but from nerves. He adjusted his scrubs, checked his reflection in the locker room mirror, and whispered to himself, "You've got this." The hospital buzzed with controlled chaos, monitors beeping, doctors barking orders, nurses weaving through crowded halls. James followed his supervisor to the cardiology department, his pulse quickening with every step. He was ready to learn, to prove himself. Then he saw him. Dr. Ethan Caldwell stood at the nurse's station, reviewing a chart. Same sharp jawline, same salt and pepper hair, same commanding presence. James froze, his breath catching. Ethan was here, his savior, the man who'd haunted his dreams for 3 years. James's lips parted to say anything, but Ethan looked up, and their eyes met. "New nurse?" Ethan asked, his tone clipped. "Professional." His blue eyes scanned James with no hint of recognition. James's stomach dropped. Yes. James Carter. Starting today?" Ethan nodded, barely glancing at him. "Good. We're short-staffed. Get to room 312. Patient needs vitals checked." He turned back to his chart. James stood there, stunned. No flicker of memory. No warmth. Had he imagined the connection 3 years ago? He swallowed hard, forcing his legs to move. Room 312. Focus. But as he walked away, he felt Ethan's gaze on his back. Brief but heavy, like a secret neither of them could name. The day was a blur of tasks: administering meds, updating charts, reassuring anxious patients. James threw himself into the work, but Ethan's coldness gnawed at him. Had he changed so much in 3 years? Or had Ethan simply forgotten? By the time his shift ended, James was exhausted, his mind a tangle of doubt and longing. He lingered in the locker room, hoping for a chance to confront Ethan, to ask why he'd acted like a stranger. Instead, he overheard 2 nurses whispering in the break room. "Caldwell's untouchable," one said. "Brilliant surgeon, but he's got walls higher than this hospital. Rumor is he's hiding something big." James's heart sank. Hiding something. He thought back to the recovery room 3 years ago, when Ethan had lingered by his bedside longer than necessary, his hand brushing James's as he adjusted the 4. There'd been something unspoken then, a spark James couldn't define. Now, Ethan was his boss, and that spark was buried under layers of professional detachment. That night, James sat in his small Chicago apartment, staring at the city skyline. He pulled out his phone and typed Ethan's name into a search engine. Articles praised his surgical precision, his awards, his charity work. But one obscure blog post caught James's eye, a vague mention of Ethan leaving a previous hospital under mysterious circumstances. No details, just speculation. James closed his laptop, his mind racing. What was Ethan hiding? And why did it feel like their past was a secret he refused to acknowledge? The next day, James arrived at Street. Luke's determined to focus. He wouldn't let Ethan's indifference derail him. But during rounds, Ethan assigned him to assist on a high-stakes surgery heart transplant. "Don't screw this up, Carter," Ethan said, his voice sharp, but his eyes lingering a fraction too long. James nodded, his resolve hardening. He'd prove himself, not just as a nurse, but as someone Ethan couldn't ignore. In the operating room, James was a shadow at Ethan's side, passing instruments, monitoring vitals. Ethan's focus was razor-sharp, but James caught the subtle tension in his movements, the way his jaw tightened when their hands brushed. The surgery was a success, and as the team dispersed, Ethan lingered, his voice low. "Good work today, Carter." James's heart leapt. "Thank you, Dr. Caldwell." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad to be here, to learn from you." Ethan's expression flickered something raw, unguarded before he turned away. "Keep up," he said, and walked out. James stood alone in the sterile room, the weight of Ethan's dismissal heavier than ever. But that flicker in Ethan's eyes told him something. The man who saved his life hadn't forgotten him. Not entirely. And James wasn't going to let him pretend otherwise. James threw himself into his work at Street. Luke's, determined to carve out a place for himself. The hospital was a labyrinth of high-stakes decisions and fleeting moments of humanity, and he navigated it with a quiet intensity. Yet Ethan Caldwell remained an enigma, a puzzle James couldn't stop trying to solve. Every interaction with Ethan was a tightrope walk. In meetings, Ethan's instructions were precise, his tone neutral, but James noticed the way his gaze lingered when he thought no one was watching. It was maddening, those fleeting glances, the almost imperceptible softening of Ethan's voice when he said James's name. Was it memory, guilt, or something deeper? Something Ethan refused to admit. One rainy afternoon, James was assigned to a patient named Maria, a 60-year-old woman recovering from bypass surgery. She was sharp-witted, her eyes crinkling with warmth as she teased James about his nervous new kid energy. He liked her immediately. As he checked her chart, she grabbed his hand. "You've got a good heart, kid," she said. "Don't let this place harden it." Her words hit harder than James expected. He thought of Ethan, of the walls he'd built. Later, in the break room, James overheard Maria talking to Ethan during rounds. "You're too serious, Doc," she said, her voice playful but pointed. "Ever let anyone in?" Ethan's laugh was tight, forced. "I'm here to fix hearts, Maria, not spill mine." He glanced at James, just for a second, and James felt a jolt. There it was again, that unspoken weight. That evening, James stayed late to finish paperwork. The hospital was quieter at night, the hum of machines a steady backdrop. He was alone in the nurse's station when Ethan appeared, his coat slung over his arm. "You're still here?" Ethan asked, his tone softer than usual. "Catch-up work," James said, keeping his voice steady. "First week's rough." Ethan nodded, hesitating. "You're doing well. Better than most new hires." The compliment caught James off guard. He looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. "Thanks. Means a lot. Coming from you." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "Don't get used to it," he muttered. But there was no bite in his words. He lingered, as if wrestling with something, then left without another word. James's frustration grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was holding back, hiding behind his role as the untouchable surgeon. Over the next few weeks, James watched him closely. Ethan was brilliant, saving lives with a precision that bordered on artistry, but he kept everyone at arm's length. Nurses gossiped about his private life, or lack thereof. No spouse, no partner, no family mentioned. Just a man married to his work. One night, James found himself alone with Ethan in the on-call room. A storm had knocked out power in parts of Chicago, and the hospital was on backup generators. They were reviewing a patient's scans, the dim light casting shadows across Ethan's face. James took a risk. "Do you ever think about the patients you've saved?" he asked. "Like who they become after?" Ethan's hand stilled on the tablet. "I fixed their hearts. What they do after is their story." "But you saved my life," James blurted, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, you operated on me." Ethan froze, his eyes locked on the screen. For a moment, James thought he'd deny it. Then, slowly, Ethan turned to him. "I operate on a lot of people, Carter." The dismissal stung, but James pressed on. "You stayed with me after. In recovery. You told me I'd be okay." Ethan's expression was unreadable, but his voice was low, strained. "You're here, aren't you? You're okay." James's chest tightened. "Why are you pretending it didn't happen?" Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not your doctor anymore. I'm your boss. Keep it professional." He walked out, leaving James in the dark. The rejection burned, but it only fueled James's determination. He started noticing small things: Ethan's habit of working late, the way he'd pause outside James's locker, the rare moments when his guard slipped. One day, during a chaotic shift, a patient coded, and James and Ethan worked side by side to stabilize him. Their movements were seamless, instinctive, like they'd done this 100 times together. When the patient's vitals stabilized, Ethan's hand brushed James's, shadera a fleeting touch, but it lingered in James's mind. That night, James found a note slipped into his locker. No signature, just a single line in neat handwriting: "You're more than I expected." His heart raced. Was it Ethan? The uncertainty was torture, but it sparked a hope he couldn't suppress. The note became James's obsession. He kept it folded in his pocket, rereading it during quiet moments, searching for clues. The handwriting was precise, like Ethan's, but he couldn't be sure. Doubt gnawed at him, but so did hope. He threw himself into his work, hoping proximity to Ethan would yield answers. Street. Luke's was relentless, each day a marathon of emergencies and egos. James excelled, earning quiet respect from his colleagues. But Ethan remained a closed book. During rounds, Ethan was all business. But James caught the occasional crack in his facade, a half-smile when James made a patient laugh, a lingering glance during a tense procedure. It was enough to keep James tethered to the mystery of Ethan Caldwell. One morning, a new patient arrived, a teenage boy named Lucas with a congenital heart defect. Lucas was defiant, scared, and quick to lash out. James saw himself in the kid, angry at a body that betrayed him. He spent extra time with Lucas, sharing stories of his own recovery to ease the boy's fear. Ethan noticed. "You're good with him," he said one day, his tone almost warm. "Not everyone can do that." James seized the opening. "I learned from the best. You were good with me back then." Ethan's face hardened, and he walked away without responding. James cursed himself for pushing too hard, but he couldn't stop. He needed to know why Ethan was shutting him out. Weeks passed, and James's connection with Lucas grew. The boy started opening up, even joking about his cool nurse. Ethan, too, seemed invested in Lucas's case, spending late nights reviewing his scans. One evening, James found Ethan in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of cold coffee. He looked exhausted, human in a way James hadn't seen before. "Mind if I sit?" James asked, sliding into the chair opposite Ethan. Ethan shrugged, but didn't object. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the hospital fading into the background. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low. "Lucas reminds me of someone I couldn't save. A long time ago." James's breath caught. Ethan never shared personal details. "I'm sorry," James said softly. "Was it someone close?" Ethan's eyes met his, raw and unguarded. "My brother. He was 16. Same condition as Lucas." The confession hung between them, heavy and fragile. James wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but Ethan stood abruptly. "Forget I said that," he muttered, and left. James's heart ached, but the pieces were starting to fit. Ethan's walls weren't just about James, they were about a past he couldn't escape. Determined to understand, James dug deeper. He asked a colleague with hospital connections to look into Ethan's history. Days later, she pulled him aside. "Caldwell's a ghost," she whispered. "He left his last hospital after a lawsuit. Something about a patient death. But it was hushed up. He's been running ever since." The revelation shook James. Was Ethan hiding from that lawsuit? From his brother's death? Or from whatever had passed between them 3 years ago? James didn't know. But he was certain of one thing: Ethan wasn't indifferent. He was scared. Their next encounter came during Lucas's surgery. Ethan led the team, his focus unyielding. But James saw the strain in his eyes. The procedure was grueling, lasting 8 hours. But Lucas pulled through. In the recovery room, James stayed by Lucas's side, holding his hand as he woke up. Ethan watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You did it," James said, meeting Ethan's gaze. "You saved him." "We saved him," Ethan corrected, his voice soft. For the first time, he didn't look away. That night, James found another note in his locker. "Stop looking for answers I can't give you." His heart sank, but the words only fueled his resolve. Ethan was pushing him away, but James wasn't giving up. Not on the man who'd saved his life and not on the truth they both seemed to fear. James couldn't let go of the notes, each one a thread tying him to Ethan. He carried them like talismans, their cryptic words fueling his need for answers. The hospital became a battleground of emotions: hope, frustration, and a longing he barely understood. Lucas's recovery gave James purpose. The boy's defiance softened into gratitude, and James felt a quiet pride in helping him heal. But Ethan remained distant, his moments of vulnerability buried under layers of control. James began to notice patterns: Ethan's late-night shifts, his avoidance of personal questions, the way he'd linger near James during quiet moments, only to pull back. One evening, James volunteered for a double shift, hoping to catch Ethan alone. The hospital was eerily calm. The night shift a skeleton crew. He found Ethan in his office, hunched over a stack of files, his face etched with exhaustion. James knocked softly. "Need help with those?" Ethan looked up, startled. "You should be home, Carter." "So should you," James shot back, stepping inside. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Ethan's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Part of the job." James sat across from him, heart pounding. "Why do you keep pushing me away? Those notes they read from you, aren't they?" Ethan's face closed off. You're reading too much into things. Am I? James leaned forward. You saved my life. Ethan, I felt something back then. And I know you did too. Why are you pretending it didn't happen? Ethan stood, his voice sharp. You don't know what you're talking about. Go home. James. But James didn't move. I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth. Ethan's eyes flashed with anger. But beneath it, James saw pain. The truth. Ethan said, his voice low. The truth is I can't afford to remember you. Not the way you want. The words hit like a punch. James stood, closing the distance between them. Why not? What are you so afraid of? Ethan's breath hitched. And for a moment, James thought he'd answer. Then Ethan turned away. Get out, he said, his voice barely audible. James left, his chest tight with hurt and determination. He couldn't let this go on it when Ethan's walls were starting to crack. Over the next few days, he kept his distance, focusing on his patients. But the tension between them was palpable. Colleagues noticed, whispering about the new nurse who'd gotten under Caldwell's skin. One afternoon, Maria, the patient who'd teased James about his heart, pulled him aside. You're in love with him, aren't you? She said bluntly. James froze, his face burning. I don't know. Maria smiled knowingly. I've seen the way you look at him, and the way he looks at you when you're not watching. Be careful, kid. He's carrying something heavy. Her words echoed in James's mind. He began to piece together Ethan's past, connecting the lawsuit, his brother's death, and the notes. Ethan wasn't just hiding from James, he was hiding from himself. Their breaking point came during a hospital fundraiser, a glitzy event in downtown Chicago. James attended reluctantly, feeling out of place among the suited donors and polished doctors. Ethan was there, impeccable in a tailored suit, but his eyes were distant. After a speech praising his work, Ethan slipped outside to the balcony. James followed. The city sparkled below, but the air was heavy with unspoken words. You can't keep running, James said, his voice steady. Not from me. Not from whatever this is. Ethan gripped the railing, his knuckles white. You don't understand. James, I'm not who you think I am. Then tell me who you are. James pleaded. Let me in. Ethan turned, his face raw with emotion. I can't. If I do, I'll ruin you. The confession hung between them, electric and terrifying. James stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. You saved me once. Let me save you now. Ethan's eyes searched his, and for the first time, James saw the man behind the mask vulnerable, haunted, and desperate for something he couldn't name. The balcony moment lingered in James's mind. Ethan's words a wound and a promise. I'll ruin you. The warning should have scared him off, but it only pulled James closer. He saw the cracks in Ethan's armor, and he wasn't letting go. Back at Street Luke's, the tension between them was a live wire. Ethan avoided one-on-one moments, but James felt his presence everywhere in the operating room, in stolen glances during rounds, in the quiet weight of his silence. James's colleagues noticed, too. You and Caldwell got history. A nurse named Sarah asked one day, her tone curious but kind. James hesitated. Something like that. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Be careful. He's a fortress. That one. James nodded. But careful wasn't in his vocabulary anymore. He needed answers. He started staying late, volunteering for shifts that overlapped with Ethan's. One night, he found Ethan in the hospital chapel, a small, dimly lit room few people used. Ethan sat in a pew, Head bowed, hands clasped tightly. James approached quietly. Didn't peg you for the praying type, he said, keeping his tone light. Ethan didn't look up. I'm not. Just thinking. James sat beside him. The silence heavy, but not uncomfortable. About what? Ethan's voice was barely audible. Mistakes. People I couldn't save. James's heart ached. Like your brother. Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes sharp. How do you know about that? I heard things. James admitted. I'm sorry. Ethan. I just want to understand you. Ethan's jaw clenched. You're digging into things that don't concern you. They do concern me, James said, his voice fierce. You saved my life. You're part of me, whether you like it or not. Ethan stood, his face a storm of emotions. You need to stop this, James, for your own good. But James was done backing down. He stood, too, closing the distance. I'm not afraid of you, or whatever you're hiding. Ethan's eyes softened, just for a moment, before he turned away. You should be, he said, and left James alone in the chapel. The next day, James found another note in his locker. You're making this harder than it needs to be. His frustration boiled over. He confronted Ethan in the parking lot after a grueling shift, the Chicago wind biting at their faces. Stop with the notes, James said, holding up the crumpled paper. Talk to me. Face to face. Ethan's face was a mask of control, but his voice betrayed him. I'm trying to protect you. From what? James demanded. The truth. Your past. Or the fact that you feel something for me. Ethan flinched. And for a moment, James thought he'd break. But Ethan shook his head. You're young, James. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me, James said, stepping closer. Let me decide. Ethan's eyes searched his, raw and conflicted. Then, without warning, he closed the distance, his lips brushing James's in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and restraint. It was over in seconds, but it left James breathless, his heart pounding. Ethan pulled back, his face stricken. I'm sorry, he whispered. I can't do this. He walked away, leaving James standing in the cold, his lips burning with the memory of Ethan's touch. The kiss was a revelation, but it came with new questions. Why was Ethan so afraid? What was he protecting James from? James threw himself back into work, but the kiss changed everything. He saw Ethan differently now, not just as the doctor who'd saved him, but as a man wrestling with demons James couldn't yet name. He needed to know more, and he wasn't stopping until he did. The kiss was a wildfire, burning through James's resolve and leaving him raw. He couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying that fleeting moment in the parking lot. Ethan's lips, his whispered apology, the fear in his eyes, it was all too much and not enough. At Street Luke's, Ethan doubled down on his distance. He avoided James's shifts, communicated through other nurses, and buried himself in surgeries. But James wasn't letting him disappear. He'd tasted the truth, and he wasn't giving up. One morning, Lucas, now discharged but visiting for a checkup, pulled James aside. You look like hell, the teenager said bluntly. What's eating you? James forced a smile. Just work stuff. Lucas rolled his eyes. Bull. It's Caldwell, isn't it? I saw you two staring at each other like you're in some soap opera. James laughed despite himself. You're too smart for your own good. Talk to him, Lucas said, his tone serious. Life's too short to play games. The kid's words hit hard. James knew he was right. That night, He tracked Ethan down in the hospital library, a quiet corner filled with medical journals and dim light. Ethan was alone, flipping through a book, his shoulders tense. "We need to talk," James said, closing the door behind him. Ethan didn't look up. "There's nothing to say." "There's everything to say," James countered, his voice steady. "You kissed me, Ethan. You can't pretend that didn't happen." Ethan's hand tightened on the book. "It was a mistake." "Was it?" James stepped closer. "Because it didn't feel like one." Ethan stood, his eyes blazing. "You don't get it, James. I'm not good for you. My life me past it's a mess you don't want to touch." "Then let me decide that," James said, his voice breaking. "I'm not a kid. I know what I feel. And I know you feel it too." Ethan's face crumpled, just for a moment, before he rebuilt his walls. "You're my employee. This can't happen." James's heart sank, but he saw the truth in Ethan's eyes: fear, not rejection. He took a risk. "Is this about the lawsuit? Your brother? Or something else?" Ethan's breath hitched. "You've been digging." "I care about you," James said softly. "I want to understand." Ethan sank back into his chair, his voice barely audible. "My brother died because I couldn't save him. The lawsuit, it was a patient. Years later, I was distracted, grieving. I made a mistake, and someone paid for it. I left that hospital, left everything. I can't let anyone close again. Not after that." James's chest ached. He knelt beside Ethan, his voice gentle. "You're not that person anymore. You saved me. You saved Lucas. You're not a failure." Ethan looked at him, his eyes wet. "You don't know what it's like to carry that." "Then let me help you carry it," James said, reaching for his hand. Ethan pulled away, but his voice was softer now. "You're too good for this, James. For me." James shook his head. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They sat in silence, the weight of Ethan's confession settling between them. For the first time, James felt like they were on the same side, fighting the same ghosts. But Ethan wasn't ready to let go it yet. Over the next week, James gave Ethan space, but he didn't back off. He left small gesturisa coffee on Ethan's desk. A note of his own: "I'm not going anywhere." Slowly, Ethan's walls began to soften. He started seeking James out during shifts, asking for his input, even smiling once or twice. It was progress, fragile but real. Then came the call that changed everything. A nurse from Ethan's old hospital reached out to James, claiming she had information about the lawsuit. "Meet me," she said. "You need to know the truth." James's heart raced. This was the key to Ethan's past and maybe to their future. James met the nurse, Carla, in a quiet diner on the edge of Chicago. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "I worked with Caldwell at his last hospital," she said, stirring her coffee. "He was a genius, but he broke when his brother died. Then came the lawsuit." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What happened?" Carla sighed. "A patient died during a routine procedure. Ethan was lead surgeon. The family sued, claiming negligence. The hospital settled, but Ethan took it personally. He blamed himself, even though the patient had undisclosed complications. He left soon after, started fresh here." James's mind raced. Was he at fault? Carla shook her head. "Not entirely. But Ethan's the type to carry the guilt anyway. He shut everyone out after that. If you're getting close to him, be careful. He's fragile, even if he doesn't show it." James thanked her, his thoughts a whirlwind. Ethan's coldness. His fear it all made sense now. He wasn't just protecting James. He was protecting himself from another loss. Back at Street Luke's, James watched Ethan with new eyes. He saw the weight he carried, the way he poured himself into his work to escape his past. James wanted to break through, but he knew it would take time. He started small, leaving notes of encouragement, offering to help with late-night charts. Ethan didn't acknowledge them directly, but James noticed the way he'd linger, the way his shoulders relaxed when they worked together. One night, a massive car accident flooded the ER with patients. James and Ethan were thrown into the chaos, working side by side to stabilize a young man with a punctured lung. Their movements were instinctive, a dance of trust and skill. When the patient was stable, Ethan met James's eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. After the shift, they ended up in the on-call room, too exhausted to leave. Ethan sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "You were good out there," he said quietly. "So were you," James replied, sitting beside him. "We make a good team." Ethan looked at him, his eyes soft but guarded. "James, I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" James asked, his voice gentle. "Let you in," Ethan admitted. "I want to, but I'm terrified." James reached for his hand, and this time, Ethan didn't pull away. "I'm scared too," James said. "But I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Ethan's fingers tightened around his, a lifeline in the dark. They sat there, hands clasped, the hospital's hum a distant comfort. For the first time, James felt like they were building something real. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. Ethan opened up in small ways, sharing stories of his childhood, his love for jazz, his dreams before medicine consumed him. James listened, falling deeper with every word. But the shadow of Ethan's past lingered, and James knew they couldn't move forward until it was faced. One evening, James found a letter in his locker, not a note, but a full letter, written in Ethan's precise handwriting. It was an apology, a confession, a plea. "I remember you, James. Every moment. I pushed you away because I didn't think I deserved you. But I'm tired of running." James's heart soared. He found Ethan in his office, the letter clutched in his hand. "You wrote this," he said, his voice trembling. "You mean it?" Ethan nodded, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry for everything. I want to try, James, if you'll have me." James crossed the room, pulling Ethan into a kiss that was slow, deliberate, and full of promise. This time, Ethan didn't pull away. The kiss in Ethan's office was a turning point, a fragile bridge between their past and their future. James felt like he was breathing for the first time in years. But he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Ethan's walls were crumbling, but they weren't gone. They started small, stealing moments outside the Hospitala coffee shop date, a walk along Lake Michigan, quiet nights in James's apartment listening to Ethan's favorite jazz records. Ethan was cautious, his vulnerability a gift he gave sparingly. James cherished every piece, knowing how hard it was for Ethan to let go of his fear. At Street Luke's, they kept things professional, but the air between them was charged. Colleagues noticed the shift. Sarah winked at James during rounds. Maria gave him knowing smiles. Lucas, now fully recovered, cornered James one day. "You and Doc finally figure it out." James laughed, his face warm. "Working on it." But Ethan's past wasn't done with him. One morning, a lawyer contacted the hospital, requesting Ethan's testimony in a follow-up case tied to the old lawsuit. The news hit Ethan hard. James found him in his office, staring at a letter, his face pale. "They want me to testify," Ethan said, his voice hollow. Dredge it all up again. James sat beside him, his hand on Ethan's knee. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here. Ethan looked at him, his eyes searching. What if they find out about us? It could ruin you. James. Your career. James shook his head. I don't care about that. I care about you. Ethan's hand covered his. A silent promise. They faced the hearing together. James sitting in the back of the courtroom as Ethan recounted the events of that fateful surgery. His voice was steady, but James saw the toll it took, the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes avoided the plaintiff's family. The judge ruled in Ethan's favor, citing insufficient evidence of negligence. But the victory felt hollow. Afterward, Ethan and James drove to the lake, the city lights reflecting on the water. Ethan was quiet, his shoulders heavy. I thought I'd feel free, he said finally. But it's still there. The guilt. James took his hand. It'll always be there. But it doesn't define you. You're more than your mistakes. Ethan looked at him, his eyes soft. How do you do that? Make me believe I'm worth something. Because you are, James said, his voice fierce. You saved my life. You save lives every day. And you're letting me love you. That's enough. Ethan pulled him close, their foreheads touching. I love you, James. I don't know if I deserve you, but I love you. The words were a gift, a tether to a future James hadn't dared imagine. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the weight of their past lighter for the first time. Months later, James and Ethan were still navigating their relationship, but they were doing it together. Ethan started therapy, working through his guilt. James took on more responsibilities at Street Luke's, earning respect as a nurse and as Ethan's partner. They faced whispers and judgment, but they also found allies: Maria, Lucas, Sarah, who celebrated their love. One evening, as they sat in James's apartment, Ethan pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring. It's not a proposal, Ethan said, his voice shy. Not yet. But it's a promise that I'm in this. For real. James slipped the ring on, his heart full. I'm in, too. Their story wasn't perfect. There were still shadows, still fears. But they built something stronger than guilt or doubt, a love that had saved them both. One heartbeat at a time.